What's going on, everyone? My name's Mech, coming to you guys with another video. Today we are talking about a diagram that I made by hand. I may make more images like this in the future, but I just had this vision in my head of like what I see with the differences in the boomer generation and my generation in terms of class and sort of where people would have been if they were just simply born in a different time compared to now, what the lifestyle is and what this stuff buys you, um, and kind of the dichotomy between the two and why things are the way that they are. I made this image 3 months ago, so it's not really fresh in my head, but I can give a brief overview on it and sort of explain what has happened since 1950 in terms of opportunity compared to now. I do talk a lot about this in my streams, so if any of you guys don't tune into my streams, I highly recommend you go through my past streams and you tune into my new ones, which I am going to be going live again soon. I know it has been about 2 months, but things happen. So, um, starting with the bottom, because I think it is probably really best to start from the bottom to where we are now with society. It used to just be that homeless people, they had the sign. A lot of them were mentally ill. A lot of them were veterans, things like that. But the homeless you see today are not what you've seen, perhaps even if you were growing up as a millennial. The homeless situation has gotten so bad in the U.S. and these people, they're a lot more like zombies, than homeless. The poverty in the homeless class, especially, are drug-ridden classes, for sure. Like they're so pretty much, um, they're really addicted to drugs to the point of dysfunction, and they're being exploited for that. And homeless people kind of have a way of going back and forth between prison and the streets. If you look at poverty, it's kind of what you see, like either homeless or prison. Most people born in poverty, their destiny is to go to prison. I mean, we've all heard like homeless people sometimes want to go to prison just to have a place to sleep for a little while, stuff like that. But the homelessness problem you see today is literally people who are addicted to fentanyl and other drugs, to the point to where they're practically zombies. The government just lets this happen. So a lot of these people with these fentanyl zombie types would not be this way had they simply just existed, 70 years ago, which really shows, you know, what it means to not care about your kids, on a low class level, is that you don't care for them to end up on the streets. Some of them I've seen actually drop their kids off in these areas. They kick them out. They're like, go. And this one girl was like, my mom kicked me out and dropped me off here, and it's like fentanyl land. So it's totally dysgenic. These people are just killing themselves off and their lineage off. Um, but yeah, um, poverty. Yeah, I mean you get it. They're going to prison. Prison. The thing you have to understand about prison is it's literally just a way of enslaving people. Like everyone in prison works a job because you can't really be that idle. So you're like, man, I'd rather do anything than nothing. So they'd actually would rather work on cars and shit than do nothing. So, as Goatus said in one of my streams, the prison system in America generates $11 billion in value annually. So, and it's only what? It's only like, how many people? Is it like 2 million people or something? Um, so 2 million people are generating that much revenue, right? Um, So I think that says it all, right? Like everyone who goes to prison is being exploited for labor. It's pretty much the point. Um, just how it is. The zombie types, they can't really be exploited for labor, so they just kind of let them die. They don't even want to reform them. There's literally no caring about them. To be fair, there's no. This whole image is like just proof that no one cares about their offspring anymore. So the black arrows are designed to, um, sort of show you where you'd go, like what the equivalent is today, right? So the equivalent of poverty 50 years ago or 70 years ago is just prison today. I mean, that's really where these people all go. There's really literally no hope for that, for anything. Like, they're just going to sell drugs. Drugs are the only profitable means of survival for them, and then they're just going to go to prison, in and out of prison. That's just what it is. The red arrow is sort of where you're going to go if you drop down a class, right? So the thing you have to understand, this is sort of baked into the image, right? It's implicitly baked into the image that everyone who is born from the Zoomer generation down is meant to drop one class. Okay? You're meant to drop a class. So it actually is extremely impressive if you were like anyone who's 26 or younger right now. If you can actually buy your kids the same lifestyle that you grew up with, that is an incredible feat because it's actually not like in your favor for you to do that. Really, you're meant to drop a class, right? So, yeah, like for example, if a working class person can buy their kids even just a basement pod and keep them out of prison, that's actually a major feat. Um, it's typically not what you're going to be seeing. You're going to be seeing a lot of people that end up, like I said, doing drugs, selling drugs. Because again, poverty and drugs is like those two things are basically synonymous, right? The other thing people don't know, and I've actually coined this, and people have actually told me it's impressive that I've mentioned this, and I was only able to say this because I'm actually from the working class, but the working class is actually a drug addict class. People don't know this. The difference between middle, working, and poverty is that middle typically does not do drugs. The parents and the children do not do drugs. They do drink a lot of wine and alcohol, especially when you get more to upper middle, it's more wine. But the middle loves to LARP as the upper middle. That's a whole separate topic. But the difference between middle, working, and poverty is that drugs and drug use is very shunned in the middle class, whereas the working class is sort of this merge, this middle ground between poverty and middle, where they're actually drug addicts, but they're what you would call functional drug addicts. I know that sounds weird, but everyone in the working class is basically defined by alcoholics, gamblers, gaming addicts. They're all addicts. They're consumers to the fullest extent. They're paycheck to paycheck slaves, and a part of that is because they spend a lot of their income on their addiction. So the difference obviously between working and poverty is that poverty people, their addictions are so bad that they actually cannot function, meaning they're so addicted to something that they really can't hold a job. So that's kind of what it comes down to. They usually have criminal records and they're in and out of prison. They're in and out of prison and they're really not um they're not really integrated into society the way working class is. Like working class, the thing people don't know is like working class families are real families. They have parents usually that are together. You know, they host Thanksgiving and Christmas, and they have normal things, but it's just everyone's kind of dysfunctional in it a little bit. Like it's usually a broken family, and it's held together by tape and glue, but it's still a sustainable situation. It's still a real situation. It's a real family. Poverty is almost always defined by single mothers. Someone left. Someone went to prison. You know what I'm saying? The kids are addicted. There's nothing going on there. It's not an actual family, right? It's there's no family, right? Working class is actually a real situation. So, what would have been working class historically, right? Which was, I don't know, you work, the kids end up with houses, things like that. It's now the case that all working class kids are being exported to this sort of basement pod life. And the basement pod is basically just a really cheap PC, maybe not the newest GPU or anything, but you're in your mom's basement, you're crammed in there, you probably live with multiple siblings because poorer people tend to have more kids due to art selection, natural art selection. But yeah, it's just pretty much what it is. It's not really the case. So the thing is, if you're born from the Zoomer generation down, like the thing you guys have to realize about me is I was never meant to move out. I was actually meant to basically stay in that room and just play video games with Luna for like ever. Like never have kids, just basically stay in there forever. It's actually not normal that working class people move out in the Zoomer generation at all. To buy yourself the lifestyle that your parents gave you as a working class person, as any of these people, is pretty much impossible, right? It's pretty much impossible. The insurmountable amount of work you need to do to buy yourself the same lifestyle that people had before is really hard. Like most people that are born into poverty right now will end up as fentanyl zombies. Most people, yes. Most people that are from the working class are going to go back and forth between getting arrested into some shitty basement pod and just pulling designer, whatever shitty overpriced clothes out of their closets. Their whole net worth is in clothes. They don't even have any savings. Um, that's pretty much what it is. It's like kind of drugs, prison, or basement pod. It's kind of like a cycle between those, right? Poverty is like, you're doing drugs, going to jail. Actually, they go to jail to get sober, believe it or not. Jail is the place where they get sober. They start, withdrawing off the drug in prison, actually. Especially these really, really strong drugs. So the basement pod is basically a very cheap pod. It's pod life is basically a way that the elites, they give you a screen and basically a computer, and it's very cheap, low effort entertainment, and it keeps people glued. It's really just a drug. It's it's a replacement for actually expanding and creating a family of your own, right? So working class people, instead of going in replacing what they had, what they were given, which is maybe you had a couple of siblings, maybe your parents were slightly religious, but maybe they didn't actually follow it. They're just not having families. They're in their mom's basement well past 20, going to go into 30s easily. A lot of them aren't having sex. A lot of them are just withering away. I actually had a really souped up situation because yes, I had the basement pod. I had an old GPU. I was crammed in a house with a ton of people. It was loud. I was constantly getting harassed for not working a real job or whatever. Like, working class people take a lot of pride in the fact that they work is a thing. Because the class beneath them is living off government assistance, right? The SSI class, the government assistance class, is the poverty class. So that's literally what it is. Working class people have this massive ego over the fact that they work at all. That's their whole thing. It's like, I work. I'm a working man. We work. That's why they all vote red. A lot of these people are conservative. Actually, the most common theme is that working class is actually conservative. Middle class and upper middle class is Democrat, and then upper and above is conservative again. That's sort of how the trend works. Upper and working are very similar in ideology, except the difference is upper is a bunch of 120 plus IQ people, and working is a bunch of 90 IQ proles with no standards, right? But they come to the same experience, as Arthur Arcturus said once. They come to the same conclusion, one through abstractions and the other through experience, right? So my dad is actually like a 90 IQ working class pro. And I'm a Spurg. So, but we're actually both conservative. But I have this like well-flourishing, like abstract world model, and mostly everything I learned, and the reason I ended up becoming right-wing is because of building out a world model, and I learned through ideology what he learned through experience. Him just being lower IQ, life kind of beats you down. And a lot of these working class people, they actually have real sustainable jobs and families. They have real operations. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, because they have real operations, they can see the writing on the wall, and they can smell out the fact that the left is totally scamming them and shit. You know what I'm saying? Basically, they're too dumb to trick in a way, and they learn from experience because, yeah, they make a lot of mistakes, but for different reasons than Spurgs, I think. So, yeah, so the working class, it's just exactly that. Now, the whole point of this graph is to show, again, what you would have had you been born a couple generations ago versus what their kids have. My dad, he is a working class pro, but the thing is he had a wife who he stayed married to for this whole time. he has a bunch of kids who, they may not be doing great, but he made it. They all made it to 18 plus. They're not completely fucked, right? So that's the whole thing with the working class is their kids though is really destined to just end up in the basement pod. They're not really ever gonna make it to being able to replicate that working class lifestyle at all. They're perfectly fine with their kids never moving out. In most cases, their kids aren't moving out. They're just staying in the house for ages 20, 25, 30. They're sort of buying their kids this basement pod life that they never had, right? So it's a complete transition period where you get what I'm saying? Like the working class dads of Gen X are sort of allowing their kids to live this basement pod type lifestyle, and it's nothing. It's not really setting them on the track to replicate what they had growing up, right? So it's almost like their situation is really deteriorating and turning into this dysgenic, you will own nothing and be happy kind of enslaved consumerism combined with advantageous conditions to really go and replicate creating a family like what they had. So then you have the middle class. I mean, the middle class is sort of really the class that got the scam the most in the last whoever knows however many years. Um, this class just got it brutal. They were sold the dream, you can have it all, and the end game was that you're gonna have nothing. You will own nothing and be happy. The degrees turned out to be a complete scam, and on top of it, all their efforts turned out they can't even buy homes. The interest rates are too high. And if a middle class person really mismanaged their situation, then where they're going to end up is the basement pod. But if they manage their situation fairly okay, then they'll end up in a pretty souped up pod. But really, a lot of these people, I know so many people right now who are 30 and childless. It's not even funny. A lot of 20-year-old childless people. Um, there's just not a lot of winners coming out of the middle class. The middle class is sort of defined by, and like I mean I've given this breakdown before on one of my streams, but because it's the topic in the video, I'll break it down again. The middle class is really defined by, like I said, not really having substance abuse issues like the working, having obviously probably twice as much pay, tend to be somewhat skilled workers, right? So working class people, they tend to just have a job. They're more like gig workers. They just kind of do a thing, right? Middle class people tend to be somebody though, right? They tend to be someone. So they're a teacher or they're like they have a career, like they have an actual skill set. They actually skill built, whether that was through education in university or not. That's sort of what it is that they actually have a skill set that they can transfer from corporation to corporation. The working class person is more just like a gig worker with no real skill set. Honestly, they just work whatever comes their way. So, um, but yeah, it turns out that the education isn't saving them, and even though they may have grown up in a house where the house is paid off, the cars are paid off, everyone has somewhat of a modern car, maybe not super rich, but every kid has a car, and they're all paid off, and there's not huge amounts of debt, and maybe you guys can take a vacation once a year. Buying that kind of lifestyle for yourself in the middle class now, like the descendants of middle class Gen Xers, these people are just literally living in a torture chamber because to replicate, that's why a lot of them don't realize it, but a lot of middle class women, um, you even see this with millennials too, younger millennials, but with Zoomers too, a lot of middle class women, they're optimizing to not have kids because it's not that they don't want kids, but they want a guy who can give them the lifestyle that they grew up with, and there is almost no men that are capable of doing that today. Like all the men are in pods, all the women are in pods. No one is making the money required because compensation isn't going up, despite the fact that like productivity is still going up in every corporation, pretty much everywhere. Compensation isn't, right? So that's one thing the leftists have right is that the wealth gap is growing. So the middle class is really stuck in like descendants of the middle class are really stuck in a situation where a lot of them are they don't notice that they're like this, but a lot of them are very upset with the dating market, and they're very upset in general. They blame a lot of stuff. They want to blame capitalism. They want to blame modern men. They want to blame, I don't know what it is, but they'll blame everything. But they won't accept the fact that they can have kids actually, um, but that their kids will not have what they have is pretty much what it is. You're not going to be able to buy that lifestyle that um, you grew up with. There's just no way. For even you to have a house where everything's paid off, coming from middle class, it's going to be very hard. Not even university is really going to save that. It's going to take a very special type of person to be able to buy it. And realistically, the descendants of middle class, they're going to end up with their kids in the pod. Maybe it'll be a nice one. Maybe it will be a non-nice one. But a lot of the really high-skilled labor is just not coming out of the middle class. You'd actually have to go up a class, which, as you see, there are no green arrows because to actually class climb now is so astronomically difficult. Um, it's kind of hard to explain why, but pretty much everyone's just getting pushed to the bottom, and all the wealth is ending up on the top. So um, it's pretty much what it is. So the middle class is really they're like the whole child free camp. Oh, I'm child free. They're really not child free. They're childless. They're lineageless, and the main reason is just because um, they can't buy that lifestyle that they had before. And so they think it's that, oh, I don't actually want kids, but really they'd marry a guy if they could find a guy who could give that to them. But the market for guys who can give that to them, it just isn't there. Like I said, the guys are in pods themselves. So there's just no guys going out carving an actual family situation ready to give every middle class woman on the planet. There's a huge amount of women who come from middle class families. And there's not enough men that are capable of giving them that lifestyle they grew up with, right? So upper middle, you have people who are from some degree of wealth. These people, in the best case scenario, they'll go to pretty nice universities. I won't say always Ivy League. Most of them won't go to Ivy League. In fact, my first girlfriend was upper middle class, and one of the defining features of her home was that the brother, the one boy, the descendant, the one male heir to the house, because it was two daughters. I was dating one of them, and then there was a male. He was educated. They sent him to a school. His dad taught him programming from a young age. But the defining feature of this guy was he was kind of, how incels are like guys that are somewhat angry that they can't get girlfriends or whatever. That's like what they try to say the definition of it is. This guy was almost like a university cell. He was almost like angry that he couldn't get into Ivy League, because Ivy League is for the upper class. It's not for you, bro. You're upper middle, and so he was like always bitter, angry, and distasteful that he was not able to go to MIT. He wasn't class. He wasn't high enough class to go to MIT because middle and upper middle pride themselves on wanting to replicate what the upper does. Like they want to be them. Those people who say, "Oh, you want to be me. You want to be me so bad. You're jealous." That's what the middle and upper middle are to the upper. They want to be them so bad. That's why they love voting Democrat. Everything about Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and these old money families, that's what they want in themselves, right? So with the upper middle, it's so bitter that they cannot get into Ivy League. It's so bitter. It would be like a huge win for someone from upper middle to end up in an Ivy League school. Typically, they go to nice schools, and daddy always pays it, university of this, university of that, but it's never Ivy League. So that's almost one of the defining features to that house, if I remember it correctly. It's that he always really wish actually they told me the mom told me don't bring it up to him because he's very sensitive about the fact that he didn't make it into MIT. Um, he had to go to just some whatever University of Ohio or University of whatever, right? Which is they aren't bad universities by any means. You still need to have a good GPA. People from the school I was from never had high enough stats to get into universities like that. Some of them, it was very, very few though. Very few. Just generally genetically more gifted people made it to those universities from the city I was from. For the most part, though, everyone from upper middle goes to some kind of university. It's very uncommon for these. I mean, it's really defined by all the kids going to university, right? So being able to transfer that, they would be university slaves, typically not Ivy League, but they would, if upper middle could sustain a situation from boomer to zoomer, it would be, that they were able to get their kids to go to some kind of university. However, this is not going to suffice, and unfortunately, most of them are going to end up in the pod, as you can see with the red arrow. They are going to end up in the pod. A lot of them will. Almost all of them will, because universities are not churning out quality people anymore, especially not average universities. AI is already proven that university is a dead phenomenon. See, the thing people don't understand when I talk about this concept is I'm not talking down on university in terms of education. I'm very pro-education. I'm self-taught myself. I try to teach myself everything. It's not education that's valueless. In fact, corporations want you to know the skills. It's just that universities aren't the place to get these skills anymore, right? And everyone is pretty much developing their own skills without the necessity of university, and it's more about contacts and self-teaching than it is about anything you're going to get through university. So, um, yeah, college is just not cutting it anymore, and upper middle is definitely in the case. The middle and the upper middle are really just some particularly scammed generationally. There's some particularly scammed classes. Um, if you look at, and I really seen it firsthand with my first girlfriend, if you look at the Gen X family and then you look at their kids, it goes from nothing short of an elegant upper middle situation, to complete disarray. Pod addicted slaves. And in some cases, I've seen many middle class. I know this is probably controversial, but in my experience, I've seen many upper middle class people drop, like, 2 classes. It's really bad. A lot of them actually these days, and I really think that the line between upper and above and upper middle and down, I should really have drawn a line there. Like upper and up is in its own camp now. And upper middle and down is kind of converging into like the same thing. It's become so bad that actually Zoomer descendants of upper middle class I've seen become Call of Duty addicts, which really means, damn, you're living the same way as working class people. But even worse, I've seen Gen X and Boomer parents of upper middle descendants um, allow their kids to do drugs and substances and listen to degenerate music and have promiscuous sex. And just the level of degeneracy, the level of decay that we've seen in the upper middle class is really bad, and it's almost like they've dropped 2 classes. Actually, it's really bad. It's one upper middle guy I know. He has like more like if you look at the picture with the pod, he does have a setup that's more like that, but it's not. He lives in the basement though. He's really been subjected to the basement, and yeah, it's pretty bad. Like, I mean, it's some kind of mix between pod and basement pod. So they're dropping like sometimes 1.5, 2 whole classes. The drug addiction problem with upper middle down is really really bad. So um, it just goes to show that it's only upper genes and above that are really, you know, surviving in this situation. So. And not the last topic, but definitely the last very important topic is the upper class. And a lot of people may be confused by this, but I promise you, the red arrow for each one of these is a very significant arrow, and the upper class is no exception to this. There is one girl I know of who's upper class, and she's a streamer that I watch, and it's definitely the case that she's dropping into this university slave category. And what is this? What does it really represent? Because the upper class they're very very well off, and they're good at passing their money down through generations. Um, Obviously they represent classiness, right? But the thing is university is not saving them, to say the least. And it's kind of the same thing with the upper. A lot of upper class people, it's an upper class boomer, it's an upper class Gen Xer, and their daughter and son is just in the pod. In between you going to a really prestigious university, they're just playing games, they're just kind of rotting. Um, they're still very responsible, very conscientious. They still go to university. They take education very seriously. They're very big on private schooling and stuff like that. But the university is not it's not generating the kinds of people where they're going on to being able to retain this wealth. They're having a hard time building the skills through university required to actually retain this wealth. And the women going to university, she's really struggling to find a guy who can give her the same upper class lifestyle that her dad gave her. This is a very big problem they're having where the dad sends their daughter off to university, pays top dollar, puts her in clubs, and it's not so much that she is being overly reserved, which is probably what he thinks, but it's that university isn't producing, and we're talking Ivy League at this point, Ivy League or things of that level. Um, these universities are not producing the kinds of men that really the girl wants, the daughter wants. Not that it's not so much that she doesn't. It really is that she doesn't want them. Honestly, it's that she doesn't want them, but they're just not the kind of men that are going to be able to give her the same lifestyle she grew up with. And that's really what it is. It's the same kind of phenomenon. All of the women born from the Zoomer generation, they're looking for a guy who can give them the same lifestyle that they grew up with. And it's becoming so difficult. Like, if you actually, it's really good if you look at most households and you look at, because, a lot of people have brothers and sisters. Look at the women and then look at the men. The women are desperately trying to find a guy who can give them what their dad did, and the men are almost always a tier below what the dad was. That's really the most common theme, is that the men aren't really as quality as the men as their father or whatever. But that is, in a lot of ways, the father's fault for not passing these ideals down, for not instilling these things in the child, right? The child is a reflection of the parents, so kind of sort of what's going on there with that. But so it's definitely the case that a lot of upper class boys and girls are getting trapped in the university. They're being taught, anti-white stuff. The universities are being completely ravaged by both Jews and Chinese. So they're, for example, in the universities in America, they teach you rabid feminism. They teach you anti-white history. They rewrite history to make it sound like whites did less than they did. They rewrite history to make it sound like other races contributed more to white culture than they did. Um, they rewrite history to make it sound like women played more of a role in society than they did. They're very anti-male. They teach lots of anti-male rhetoric. And that's sort of this is the kind of slop. You're paying $60K a year for your kid to be taught lies, pretty much. And then you see in Australia and also other places that probably New Zealand and stuff like that, places that are near China tend to have a very Chinese influence, right? Actually, if you guys ever go to Hawaii, you're going to notice a lot of Asians, and that's because Hawaii is closer to China than anywhere else in the U.S., and so they kind of keep a stranglehold over. That's why you needed to get the vax to travel to Hawaii during COVID. China sort of has this weird stranglehold over certain white-owned areas, and Australia is a good example of one where they teach very well. First off, a lot of those upper-class universities, there's a lot of Chinese people in them, and for a white person to be going to those universities today, you're going to be noticing a lot of Chinese people in those universities. And then part of the curriculum in there is about giving the indigenous, by the way, the indigenous Aboriginals in Australia are somewhere between 60 and 80 IQ. They're some of the lowest IQ people on the planet. Thousands and thousands of years could have passed and they could have never built a civilization, ever. It's literally impossible. And they're being taught things like Aboriginals deserve rights. They helped build the society. They rewrite history to make it sound like Aboriginals actually helped build the place. Everything is about giving the Aboriginals rights, and that's because China gets a stranglehold over the universities in Australia and New Zealand, and they force this anti-white rhetoric onto the universities. So this is the kind of stuff that happens in these upper-class universities now. They're completely ravaged. They're the kind. It's like they're like almost like molested. They've been raped. They've been taken and sort of like literally like ravaged. That's the word. And you have all this crazy stuff that's being taught to the upper class people, and so it's just not generating quality men. Women only go to university for the most part to advertise, and also to assert what kind of guy that they want. So they go to university because they think they're going to find the kind of guy that they want to marry there, right? But it's not happening anymore. It's just not. It's not creating those kind of men. So a lot of the failed boomers and Gen Xers, what's happening is they are just sending their kids to university. They're even paying top dollar, but they're just finding that it's not actually creating. It's not really building their kids into the kind of kid that they want them to be, right? So the upper class families, the upper class is already a very small class, right? The upper class families that are actually making it in today's era is the ones that are resorting to private mentorship. So they're actually not even sending their kids to college at all. Or some of them will, but then they'll mentor them from in their teens and also on the side, and they'll also continue to mentor them after this. Mentorship has seen a massive surge in the upper class in the last 10 years, and it was never really this way in the past. I mean, the elites, yes, the elites would mentor their kids, but it was never the case that the upper class would. It was usually the case that the upper class would just go get a PhD, and then they would they would retain their upper class status through their PhD. This has become an insufficient strategy for actually raising your children. And this is kind of what's happened with the upper class is the successful descendants of upper class families today, the Gen X families that are retaining their wealth, right? The Gen X families that are actually going to go on to have their kids build the same quality of a situation that they had growing up. The Zoomers are being privately mentored with very, very very, very rare knowledge, pretty much. And it's even more rare when you get to the elite level. And if you notice at the highest level, you see elite. There's an arrow pointing to aristocratic, pointing down to private mentorship. The thing about it is, it used to be that elites were just elites. They were just better version of the upper. So they were basically people whose descendants would go on to be senators and politicians and stuff like that. The elites now have become so rich. They've taken and siphoned so much money from the classes beneath them, and the wealth gap has gotten so big because think about it, basement pod and pod life people, they just spend all their money. They're not really striving to compete for the wealth of the upper class. They are literally fine owning nothing, and they actually are happy in the pod. That's the thing people don't understand about the pod. The pod is the way that it is because people actually really like it. Like, it's not like they're being tricked. They actually want to live in the pod over making a family. Like, literally, that is their real desire. The true desire of upper middle class and down Zoomers is the pod. That's their real desire. They don't actually want to date and make families. That's why so few of them date. However, the upper class and the elite class really strive to keep the wealth in the family and push these ideals down. And the way that they do this is, obviously through mentorship and university. But the thing is because they're the only ones actually still striving for money, they've become sort of aristocratic. It's not really the case that they're really elite level anymore. They've almost become people who can buy infrastructure and actually buy into the system itself, which is what you see with Elon. He was originally a businessman, but he really kind of has the power in a lot of ways of banking families. It used to be only banking families were aristocrats, right? Banking families would be the ones to own the infrastructure, and the businessmen would kind of be like subservient to the banking families. And banking families would love owning a piece of the pie of the companies that the businessmen make, right? This is so not the case anymore. Aristocratic people or elite people have become basically aristocrats themselves, being able to buy things like Twitter and buy actual infrastructure and influence. In prior times, in the 1800s, something like Twitter or Twitter's level of power, only a family that was a banking family could have bought something like that. But that's not the case anymore. You have actual everyday elite businessmen kind of playing a more aristocratic role rather than just being slightly more elite level upper class people, perhaps who play some kind of role in politics. They're actually desiring to own large sums of infrastructure and take things over, which I think says a lot. I mean, I probably could have a tier above this that would just be titled banking families. That's really what aristocrats, a lot of the aristocrats at least, are defined by. And yeah, I think part of the issue is the reason that you see such a decay in society is a society is only as good as the quality of its banking families. And unfortunately, the banking families that exist today are very low quality. They're not governed by Christianity by any means. They believe in high interest rates. They believe in usury, and yeah, they're just very immoral people. And that's just what it is. They don't actually care about their lower classes, but they don't even really care about their own families. It just feels like when you look at a family in decay, it really says a lot about the people at the very tippy top. And you think the people at the top are businessmen, but actually banking families are like businessmen times 100. They're like the most quality men that exist like on the planet. So if banking families are low quality, of course you're going to see the proles are going to be absolute swine, and everyone in the middle is just going to be, um, you know, rapidly converging into the same thing, and it's kind of what you see with the general decay of society. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about this dichotomy that it's baked into the modern system that everyone is going to be a class beneath what their parents were when it comes to Zoomers and Boomers. Um, Wealth inequality is growing, and very few people know how to retain it. There is actually a massive wealth transfer. They call it the greatest wealth transfer in history, and it kind of is happening in a way. Most people are going down, and very few people are going to end up hoarding most of the wealth. Let's just hope that going forward, the people at the very top actually have some kind of standards, and that it trickles down, because money might not trickle down, but standards definitely do. So